So, what is this funny little red shoebox of a car you're driving today, Nick? Well, this is a 1986 Toyota MR2. And it heralds back to the days when Toyota made interesting cars. And they didn't just make one or two interesting cars, they had a whole range of sports cars and souped up models. Back then, even Toyota Corollas had an interesting model, a sporty model. I wanted a Toyota Corolla back in those days. Yes, Toyota had all sorts of great sports cars, and the MR2 was just one of those models. And this MR2 is the original MR2, the first generation, and I believe this is the first generation of the first generation. There was two generations within the first generation. And I've always loved this tiny little box shape. And of course, being a car from the 1980s, it's super light. In fact, for most markets, this car weighed in at less than 2,000 pounds or less than 1,000 kilograms, which is a very light car. And it's really cars from the 80s and earlier that could achieve that because they don't have, you know, a lot of the safety equipment that modern cars have, like airbags and so forth. And because it's so light, it doesn't need a lot of power to make it a fun car to drive. This car has Toyota's very respectable 1.6 litre twin cam engine, which here in the US put out between 110 and 120 horsepower depending on the year and the model. In other markets it's about 130 horsepower, and later in the 80s they even had an option for a supercharger engine which put out 140, 150 horsepower. But yeah, even this most basic engine, I believe the engine in this particular 86 is probably the 115 horsepower. Still plenty of power for such a light car. So this little MR2 is a true sports car in that it is a mid-engined rear-wheel drive car. And its design is very similar to the Fiat X19, although this is a far superior car to the Fiat X19, which was grossly underpowered, and being a Fiat, absolutely nothing ever worked in those cars. Whereas this being a Toyota, everything always worked. And here we are, 30 years later, and everything's still working in this car. It is such a neat little car. And if you'd watched some of my previous videos, I'd actually mentioned this very model as something I've wanted to own myself my whole life. And it is somewhat tempting for me to buy this one. So, what's it like to drive? Well, I can say this is perhaps the most fun I've ever had in a Toyota. It really is a great deal of fun to drive. Not because the engine's powerful, because it's not, but it's powerful enough for such a light car. But it's everything else that makes this a unique experience. You know, this is a very short wheelbase, it handles fantastically, and there's power nothing in this car. There's no power steering, there's no power windows, not even power locks. But the clutch is a very short throw, it's very light, very predictable, but it's really the gearbox. I love the gearbox. What I mean by that is, obviously it's got nice ratios, but it's where the gear lever sits. You put your arm down and it falls straight into your hand, and it's a nice short clunky throw. It is one of the nicest gearboxes I have ever experienced. Oh, I love this little 30-year-old Toyota. It really is such a pleasure. I knew I'd love it, but I had no idea. What a sweetheart. So because of its unique layout with the engine in the back, people have done some pretty strange things to these little MR2s. One guy, very famously, more than 10 years ago, had an eBay auction for one of his MR2, which he had modified specially. And what he had done is he'd taken the engine out of the back and he'd replaced it with 3 small jet engines, complete with all the gas in here and all the throttles and everything. Oh wow. I hovered over that ad for hours. Where is my $30,000 when I need it back then? I'm going to stop up here in a quiet spot so that we can have a look around the outside and a look in the inside and go over some of the unique features of this little MR2. This being a very early model, it doesn't have the T-bar roof. I believe the year after this model they introduced the T-bar roof where you take the whole roof off, but this one does have the sunroof. This being an 80s car, of course, it's got the pop-up headlights. What a shame we don't get pop-up headlights anymore. I love pop-up headlights. And it's a very small car, but just like, you know, modern Boxsters and Caymans and sports cars that are like two-seat sports cars, they're fine little storage cupboards here and there for the car. So, you know, there's a little trunk up the front, and there's even one behind the engine there. So it's not completely unusable. Okay, let's start with a quick walk around this little wedge-shaped beauty. Obviously the thing you notice the most is its 1980s very angular shape, but also that it's such a tiny car. You know, next to any modern car, this thing is a midget. And of course it has the 80s and 90s pop-up headlights. Let me demonstrate. Pop them up. Here we go. Pretty cool. Yeah, so it's a tiny little car, very wedge shape. If you're going to buy a classic MR2 like this, the thing to look for really is the condition of the body. Everything else is pretty fixable, pretty easy to fix, but the body's a lot harder to fix. So yeah, look for rust around these sills areas and in the joins here. This car's in pretty great shape. This is one of the more expensive models. You probably pay upwards of $10,000 for something like this, but you can get them much cheaper, but you end up spending a lot of money fixing them up. So if you're going to get a classic MR2, maybe spend a little more up front for a model with a great body. All right, let's have a look at the interior. Okay, before diving inside, let's have a look at the trunk space. There's a little trunk back here. Couldn't fit a person in there. Well, it had to be a pretty small person. And here, of course, is the engine bay. That's 1600 twin cam, used in so many Toyotas back then. And up the front, there's a little trunk as well. This one isn't as big as you think it would be. Yeah, it's a little spot by the spare wheel here. Let's jump inside and have a look around the spacious interior. Actually, it's not too bad. For a small car, it's not too bad in here. You know, I'm 6 foot tall and I'm pretty comfortable and my head doesn't touch the roof. And I've got plenty of leg room. You know, for a very, very small car, it's surprisingly roomy inside. It doesn't have a lot of amenities. You know, it's got wind-up windows and the locks aren't power locks. But it does have aircon. It's got a Toyota branded stereo from the 80s. And it's got a 150 miles per hour, 240 kilometer an hour speedometer. Let's start her up. Oil temperature and all the dials you need, and that annoying buzzer. That buzzer drives me mad. That would be the first thing I'd snip if I owned this car. But yeah, for a car with 60,000 odd miles, it's holding together pretty well. Even these 1980s seats, you know, a lot of cars from the 1980s, the material wasn't a high quality. These ones seem to be holding together, and they've got nice bolsters on them. They're really comfortable. I'm so comfortable driving this car. And of course over here you've got your very 80s looking stalks, which of course raise the cool pop-up headlights, and a nice leather wrapped steering wheel. But of course the best part is the lovely gear lever. Oh, what a joy. Modern car companies could learn a lot from driving a 1986 MR2, I tell you. So yeah, really quite a nice little car on the inside as well. Yeah, as you can tell, I quite love this car. So a quick backstory is how I ended up in this little MR2. There is a car dealership just down the road from my house in Southport called the Classic Car Gallery. And they specialise in sports cars and exotics, and they always have great cars in there, and I'm always looking through the window and having a look at their cars. And they recently contacted me and asked me whether I'd like to review some of their cars, and would I? Fantastic. So yeah, they've got great exotics, which probably leads you to ask, why am I driving the cheapest car on their lot, a Toyota? Well, it's because I've always loved this model, and yeah, sure, I'll get on to driving some of their Ferraris and their Porsches and so forth, but yeah, my heart has always been wanting to drive one of these little MR2s, so this is the one I grabbed first, even though it's probably the least exotic on their lot. Okay, so that's my thoughts on the little 1986 MR2. What a sweetheart. I truly hope that I get to own one of these cars one day. In fact, it's so tempting to buy this actual one until my 911 turns up. Yeah, it didn't disappoint. It is as much fun to drive as you think. And a surprisingly well put together car. And you know, harks back to an era when Toyota made fun cars, and I hope they get back to making fun cars again soon, because you know, when they make fun cars, they do such a great job of it. Anyway, if you're interested in buying this car, I'll put the link to it down the bottom. You know, or if you have the opportunity to drive a first generation MR2, do take it. They are a unique experience, that's for sure. Great little car. Thanks for watching, everybody.